Welcome to another episode of Experts of the Americas, where we sit down with influential stakeholders across the hemisphere to unpack some of the region's most urgent challenges and explore solutions to address them. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsht Latin America Center. Today, I'm joined by Juan Carlos Zapata, the Executive Director of the Foundation for the Development of Guatemala, better known as Fundesa. Juan Carlos, it's great to have you here with us today. Juan Carlos brings more than 2 decades of experience in advancing economic and social development in Guatemala. His work focuses on boosting competitiveness and attracting investment through private-led initiatives like Guatemala No Se Detiene. He also serves as director of the National Council of Competitiveness and participates in the Private Council for Competitiveness and the Board of Directors of Invest in Guatemala. He's a longtime partner and friend of the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center, including through his active role in our America's Economic Security Working Group. And this year, we're extremely excited to take our partnership to the next level through new work focused on Guatemala's economic future with Fundesa. We'll be officially kicking things off on June 6th, but today's conversation gives us a great chance to talk about what's ahead. Juan Carlos is in Washington as part of a high-level Guatemala delegation meeting with U.S. government officials and institutions. These conversations are focused on strengthening trade and investment and building new pathways for public-private collaboration between Guatemala and the United States. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive into the goals and outcomes of this visit, explore the recent upgrading to Guatemala's credit rating, discuss new momentum around infrastructure investment, and also how these developments can help to drive economic growth in the country, as well as stronger U.S.-Guatemala ties. Juan Carlos, let me start by asking you about the reason that brings you to Washington this time. Why are you here?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jason. And I think it's a very good opportunity to talk about what's happening in the world and, of course, in Guatemala. We all know that with tariffs, Guatemala has now 10% tariffs to all exports coming into the U.S. And this is an exciting time because what we see right now is an important topic that we have met with different people within the USTR department. And what we have spoken to them is that there's an opportunity right now to work together. We understand the challenges that Guatemala has in different non-tariff barriers that have been implemented and that within Guatemala have been focus a lot on how to increase rule of law, on how to increase legal certainty. And Guatemala is focusing right now on digitalization, specifically for permits. So all that has to do with digitalization for permits for exports has given the Guatemalan government an opportunity to share with the U.S. authorities all the different aspects that the government of Guatemala is focusing on in order to increase economic development, in order to ramp up how they're focusing on exports, but also how to improve business climate. And we have seen that the Guatemalan authorities are working together with the private sector through this initiative called Guatemala No Se Detiene, or Guatemala Moving Forward, in order to increase not only rule of law, but also human capital and infrastructure.
Juan Carlos, I sat down virtually with the economy minister, with Gabriela Garcia, about 2 weeks ago. And actually, she had a somewhat similar message about the importance of digitalization, efficiency of processes. And here at the Atlantic Council, Guatemala is so important given the strong ties that we have between our two countries, given the fact that Guatemala is Taiwan's largest ally globally. And your visit and that of your entire delegation comes at such an important moment. You've had these conversations with USTR. Give us a little bit more of a readout of how those conversations went, as well as based on those conversations, what you see insofar as some of the key opportunities for further accelerating U.S.-Guatemala ties, especially on the public-private side.
Well, what we have seen is that we've met both with public and private groups here in Washington, D.C. and within different states. And what we have realized is that many people understand that Guatemala, we have a deficit with the U.S. Yeah. So actually, the U.S. exports more to Guatemala than we export to the U.S. So there is an opportunity for understanding of how our economic relationship is tied to development because most of the exports that Guatemala has to the US are basically focused on textiles, mainly fruits and coffee.
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity for complements on different products. And you had a very important event here with the avocado launch that is one of the most important products that we hope to start exporting to the US. And that could actually mean more economic development that can reduce migration to the US as well. So what we have seen is that digitalization in Guatemala has been a process. Over the past 10 years, that has been one of the key areas in which you can start to increase rule of law, to generate more legal certainty, and to improve the business climate.
And make it much easier to do business in Guatemala as well.
Make things easier because we do have a lot of permits, a lot of bureaucracy within the government just to open a business. And this has given both the private and the public sector the opportunity to work together on those topics.
And so important, Juan Carlos, because these are things that we're focused here at the Atlantic Council, working with Fundesa. This is a priority as well. And I know as well from the Guatemalan government, there's a desire to be able to make those processes even more efficient. I want to move on to the credit rating. Very, very important news that Guatemala's sovereign credit rating was upgraded by S&P Global from BB to BB+, one step closer to an investment grade. Share with our audience, I mean, this is a significant milestone for Guatemala. Share with our audience, what were some of the key factors that have been shaping this upgrade, and what do you see as pending to get to the next level?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there was a lot of initiatives within Congress that were approved, like the infrastructure bill and both the competition bill. These two initiatives were approved last year in Congress. So when you read the report of Standard & Poor's, you realize that they value the cooperation that has been happening between the government and Congress to move forward an agenda that can increase opportunities within the country. The other factor has to do with going after corruption, and there has been a task force and a commission focused on reducing corruption in the country that has been very important as well. And the other thing has to do with how the government is focusing on foreign direct investment attraction. Foreign direct investment grew around 5% this year compared to last year compared to the year before. And what we have seen also is that Guatemala is one of the key countries where you can actually start working together. Fundesa has been part of the business roundtable that has been supporting the government in order to increase communication with the different credit rating agencies. So what you see is that not only Standard & Poor's, but Fitch in the moment and Moody's also are improving the rating for countries like Guatemala because they're looking at how public-private partnerships are working in the country and how this is a factor to bring more economic growth.
Well, talking about public-private partnerships, I know my conversations with Guatemalan authorities, as well as those in the private sector, is the importance of infrastructure. Infrastructure development and that's also highlighted by S&P as needing continued improvement. And as well, President Arevalo, his whole team has identified infrastructure improvements as critical for Guatemala. Congress recently passed legislation to enable the expansion, rehabilitation, and also maintenance of priority infrastructure projects. Share with our audience, what are some of the initiatives that you expect to move forward in the near term, as well as what are some of the pending challenges to be able to facilitate more infrastructure improvements? And I want to ask you separately about the Army Corps of Engineers, but let's start macro on infrastructure.
Well, when you look at infrastructure in Guatemala, you know that Guatemala has only 1 meter per road when the US has 20. That's one main difference when you talk about roads within two different countries. So we have 1 meter per person, the US has 20 meters per person. So that's a big difference. And what we have seen is that last year, Congress approved an initiative that was in Congress for 8 years on roads. So the initiative gives the government the opportunity not only to have more funding for infrastructure, for roads, but also it has the opportunity to give certain bylaws on eminent domain and rule of law in order to have more capabilities within the government to not only construct but operate roads within the country. So what we have seen is that Guatemala's investment on public infrastructure is only 1.6% of GDP, which is very low to any international standards. A country like Guatemala should be invested in at least 6% of GDP on public investment. So what we have seen is that with this initiative, there has been a change on the bylaws on how roads will be operated. That is already starting to happen. And the other thing is that we're still pending some initiatives like the reform on the PPP law for public-private partnerships in order to have a fast track for those projects to actually, because right now they all have to go to Congress and we all know how much that can take. So if the projects can be contracted directly by ANADIA, which is basically the institution that focuses on PPPs within Guatemala, that is going to accelerate the capabilities for the Guatemalan government to actually have more infrastructure in the country. The other initiative that was just presented by the president, and we are it has been very important for the country, is a port authority law, and which gives a port system bylaws in order to have more ports investment, private investment in ports in the country. And that's going to be very important because our ports really need more.
Well, speaking about upgrading ports, and I want to also contextualize this. We're focusing on infrastructure because it's so critical for Guatemala's future, and infrastructure is the bedrock for broader economic development. And such important news just recently that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers signed a 30-year agreement with the Guatemalan government to support the modernization of the port of Quetzal. This is a key trade hub on Guatemala's Pacific coast. Can you talk a little bit about why this partnership is so important? And also, this comes, a few months after Secretary Rubio's visit as well. So it also shows the significant importance of our bilateral relationship at this incredibly important time for Guatemala.
Well, what we saw is that Marco Rubio's first visit to the region was very important for us because it actually gave us the opportunity to understand how Guatemala had to move forward in order to increase better investment. And ports is one of the biggest challenges that the country has, specifically in the Pacific coast. Yeah. You can see every day almost 30 to 40 ships coming in, waiting just to be able to unpack things within the port. And once you realize the cost that it has for the country is losing almost $1 billion a year just because of inefficiencies on operations within that port. It has to grow, it has to have better operations, and has to increase its capacity. So what we have seen after that visit is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers signed a couple of weeks ago an agreement with the government of Guatemala in order for the government to pay. It's going to be an investment from the Guatemalan government. It's going to be almost $600 million investment that the Guatemalan government is going to pay the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for them to actually expand the operations of the port. And that is going to be one of the largest investments in ports happening in the region in the past 30 years. Yeah. So that's really going to be right now one of the most important investments.
It's an incredibly significant development. I know we'll talk about that even further on June 6th, when we officially kick off our year-long partnership with an event focused on economic and security cooperation. I'm delighted that we'll have both the U.S. Ambassador to Guatemala, Toby Bradley, and Guatemala's Ambassador to the U.S., Hugo Beteta, here at the Atlantic Council. I want to again thank you, Juan Carlos, for coming in and for the insight as part of this Experts of the Americas recording, and look forward to all the events that we'll do as part of this partnership.